talk about some things.
Should we talk about beta? Or how are we
Yes,
looking
that's what I was
beta?
gonna talk about. Is there anything else we want to allocate time for? If not, we can spend everything on beta readiness. Okay, yeah, I guess. Let me pull up this. So in the past few weeks, we've made a lot of progress, I think. There's kind of two landmarks I think we want to hit for beta. One is that we've finished all the things that can be construed as features in time for the code freeze, which is Monday. I think we're pretty much there. Stephen has maybe 1 or 2 PRs out, I think still for attaching policies to services instead of the entire gateway. But I think that was pretty close, so I don't think that will be an issue. And then one on implicit policy for waypoints. For the rest, though, as far as I know, that's pretty much the last outstanding feature. Oh, aside, there was also the telemetry format for waypoints that Daniel and Whitney are working on. Aside from that, I think everything is pretty much ready to go from my perspective. We've checked off all of the items that we had identified. I've been stress testing it myself for a while, and things are looking pretty good, I think. The one thing that's left all over the list is all sorts of documentation stuff that we absolutely need to do, but we don't necessarily need to do before the code freeze. But once we lock things in for the code freeze, it's probably something that we should start focusing on. The other thing, of course, is there'll be a lot of bug fixes that I'm sure we'll find over the next few weeks, but we can get those in after the code freeze, so I'm not too concerned about those. But yeah, overall, I think things are good and on track for beta in 1.22. Any thoughts?
Just to make sure we're on the same page, as far as what was dropped from beta scope. The big one is obviously policy status. Is there anything else major that we consciously dropped from beta scope?
What have we dropped? Yeah, status was a big one. Multi-cluster. That's also a big one.
Oh, speaking of multi-cluster and some of that work, we may have come to a conclusion on it, and I just forgot. Did we get to a decision on DNS being disabled by default? Is that already done?
DNS is disabled by default, yes.
Okay, good. So the default utility binary doesn't have any of the DNS stuff enabled.
I mean, the binary, it's not like it's compiled out or anything, but it's off by default. You have to turn it on explicitly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, just like Envoy. So.
That's a DNS in zTunnel?
Yes.
I think there's one thing, John, you and Keith was pushing pretty heavily in the past. I think was related to like enable. You have to opt in to enable like experimental features. Else it's not enabled by default. And somebody in the community signed up, but I doubt it's going to happen in 1.22. I can find the issue if you don't remember.
Yeah, the main thing, so on zTunnel side, DNS is a big one that's opt-in. No, we haven't done it. So if we want to, then we need to do that ASAP.
What will we be disabling? So you've got your HBone enablement PR. DNS is already disabled by default. What are the experimental? Because it sounds like we're shooting for L7. I think the big thing with disabling experimental features for Ambient was, or alpha features for Ambient, was to make sure people could use the stable L4 stuff.
Yeah.
And not shooting for L7. I mean, what else are we
like? There's like the whole like some random stuff in zTunnel, like the SOX proxy, for example. We could probably turn that off. we could explicitly turn off multi-cluster entirely, for example, so that not that like it just straight up doesn't work, or you can't use Ambient if you have multi-cluster or something. I don't know. Those are the obvious ones that come to mind. There's not many. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that's already existing Istio stuff that's not new to Ambient that has the same issue, but I guess that's not really necessarily in scope. Yeah, I guess there's not so much. Multi-cluster, I think, is the most obvious one, and that was actually one of the main things that I had in mind long ago when we first discussed this, was multi-cluster and the waypoint. So.
Is it fair to add multi-network to the list too?
Yeah, I mean, multi-network relies on multi-cluster, so
yeah,
multi-network is even less than multi-cluster in terms of stability.
Dual stack?
That's also on the list of not working. So,
yeah,
yes.
but that's like experimental even for sidecar too, right?
Yep.
So we're looking for things specifically that are beta or higher for sidecar, but alpha for ambient.
I mean, I guess take the obvious, a lot of the L7 features, right? Or all the L7 features.
Actually, no, John, you want to update that?
Okay.
Yeah, I think everything I was saying was applying for L7 as well. That I think we can and should get that in for 1.22 beta.
So have everything been signed off for what the ergonomics of what L7 and waypoints looks like? I mean, there was that doc. It seemed like everything was directionally approved, but was it formally approved?
It was implemented as far as I know. I was actually going to try it this afternoon. So I think it was implemented, and Ian was going to update the get started guide, make sure the test works in the get started guide with the new way to annotate things.
Okay. But I mean, like, should that be approved officially by the TOC? I mean, it seems like, it's a pretty big, API that we're locking in, right?
Yeah, last time I checked, I think all the TOC member had directional approval on that.
Is that sufficient?
I think I think we'll need to do a formal TOC review of, like what we had decided for beta was that we will post like 1 week or 2 weeks post the cut. We'll meet and decide go or no go on the beta. So I think we should do a formal review of not just yes or no on the beta, but here's all the things that are in the beta. Are we committed to all of those? And then I think that should satisfy that. We may also want to start looking at that sooner, so that if we decide we don't like an API, for example, it's much easier to change the API today than it is next week. So,
right.
What about IPv6 only? I know we said we don't support dual stack, because I remember seeing some issue related to that got resolved, but I wasn't sure if we're ready to claim IPv6 only, like single IPv6.
Yeah, there's a few smaller bugs around that that still need to be fixed. For
yeah,
IPv6
let's not support that. We don't have
Sounds good.
So.
Keep it with
Okay,
dual stack.
I'll add it. Yeah, I'll add it to the list.
For some reason, it feels like IPv6 is even less supported, like less tested and stable than dual stack. From what I've seen, that might be my impression.
Yeah, I feel like it's implicit in dual stack anyway. I'd rather just like have dual stack be. Also, you could just do IPv6 alone and it's single stack. It's sort of the same. Like the concerns are almost always mixed. So it's, to me, they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I know we have users using IPv6 single stack. Dual stack is like another level of stability, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, dual stack is much worse instability than IPv6, actually, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah,
That's the impression I got from people. Like we have people running IPv6 in production, but not dual stack.
Yeah, I learned. Good to know. I guess the dual stack implementations I've seen have used some. Sorry, the single stack IPv6 implementations I've seen have some dual stack under the hood somewhere, but yeah, just what I've seen so far.
Okay, what else we should talk about? We drop in the out of the beta. Oh, external service that wasn't scoped in the beta, right? Is that's still not working? Support for external service or egress gateway?
Yeah, no egress, but there's not even a way to configure it. So like it is not included in the beta, but it's not necessarily something that we have to go turn off.
Okay. One question I have is when I look at our docs, I mean, we have docs for Istio Cuddle and Get Started, and we have docs for Helm, install Ambient. Do we want to, I'm trying to understand our stance on installation. So operator is out, right? So is Helm, just having Helm doc is sufficient? Do we also want a doc page for Istio Cuddle?
I think we should have Istio Cuddle and Helm.
Okay, so Istio Cuddle is not just for get started. We still continue to recommend Istio Cuddle for installation in production, in addition to Helm.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend Helm over Istio Cuddle, but I don't think we need to not document Istio Cuddle. Like that seems a unnecessary source of friction.
Should we prefer Helm instructions in like an ordering scheme in the docs, like where we show you Helm first, or do we want to go down that road?
Sure, if it's the first tab instead of the second tab, I don't mind.
Yeah. I mean, it does matter, but like,
yeah.
I'll
leave that to other people to decide.
Okay, and then do we have agreement to have ambient mode as the first level when 122 goes out? So it would be similar like operations, maybe somewhere along here, like setup task examples. I know, Keith, you started a discussion on the docs. I don't know. I just want to confirm with everybody if people are comfortable with that or does people have other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm still in favor of that for what it's worth. Honestly, I'm not sure. I'm not a huge fan of the setup and the taxonomy of our docs to begin with. I just haven't had the bandwidth to propose an alternative. But I think ambient as a top level section is a good first step.
All right. If I'm not hearing any disagreement, I'll open an issue to track that so we can get that down. Anything else we should be discussing on beta and 122 for ambient?
Yeah, I think I just echo Justin's request to get formal TOC approval. Like I've been interpreting directions approval with like formal approval just because of the kind of the way the timeline worked out. But I think will be good just to get full sign off on everything, especially now
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned with just sort of how quickly this happened. You know, because going from directional to this is the final API right before we're launching, I think is not really a great precedent.
Yeah, I will ping every TOC member, make sure they can weigh in on this. And Justin and kids, if you guys want to take another look and weigh in the doc, that would be appreciated too.
Yeah, I've been following the evolution of the design, and I have a good sense of everything. So I think, like, personally, I'm okay with the outcome. But I do think that it's good to make sure that we're doing things the right way as well.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, I think part of we're trying to see if we can have waypoint in as part of the beta is we've noticed there's a lot of confusing saying ambient is beta but not waypoint being beta, right? Because people, when you say ambient is beta, people would expect waypoint is part of it, so that would be surprising for people finding out when
But
we
this
claim
isn't
it.
new, right? I mean, this is something that we were saying even a few weeks ago, that we didn't think that L7 was going to be, or the waypoint integration was going to be available. So this is a pretty quick turnaround, and it feels like a lot of the API surface still for what ambient looks like is still up in the air as well. So it feels like we're sort of partially implementing it, but there's a lot that is still a little bit underdefined for me.
Yeah. I mean, depends on the outcome, we can decide, what's appropriate to claim beta. If waypoint is not ready for beta, or maybe waypoint is only ready for beta for these simple scenario when these APIs we feel comfortable. So yeah, let's take that offline with you guys and the TOC member, and who else wants to weigh in.
I think on the substance, the biggest gap for me, and I mentioned this to John and also earlier in this meeting, is auth-z status. That's the biggest omission for me. I think I said this in this last TOC meeting that we had. But like putting my steering hat on, I think it's, if we can say that ambient is beta quality with integrity, I think we should stretch for that because it's better for the project's messaging as a whole. And I think that some of that desire is what's kind of led to the speediness of the implementation and such. But we do need to make sure that it is beta, and we do need to make sure that we have the proper sign-offs and process on the design docs. So just throwing that out there for what it's worth. I think that the biggest gap, if anything, it would be auth-z policy based on what I understand of the proposal and what's been implemented so far. But I will do one last look, one last comb through and see if there's anything missing.
Yeah, thanks for the input. So maybe one way we can look at this is maybe just the traffic portion reach beta first. So do you think that would be useful? Because based on our survey last year, a lot of people are using traffic management out of Istio. And auth-z policy status, if we really don't feel comfortable we can get more thoughts on this for sure. Keith, you will voice your opinion, then we can decide, maybe authorization policy layer 7, that portion is not ready yet.
I disagree on dropping OTC policy. I think that's really, really important. But more generally, I also want to say that beta doesn't mean it's permanent. It means that we have stability guarantees, that we can't just drop things release to release without migration stages. But if we decide that we hate the use waypoint annotation, for example, we can continue to support it for a release or two, transition to a new one. Like, we're not ossified, especially on the first launch.
Historically,
hold up. What we have done in the past is we ship a feature and let it sit there for 5 years and then say, well, now we can't do anything about it. That's absolutely true. But Ambient is different. It's very actively developed. We'll get feedback immediately. We need to make decisions quickly, yes, if we're going to change it. But it's not like, if we were going to say everything's permanent, then we wouldn't be calling this beta right now, right? We'd call it stable right away. There'd be no reason to call it beta. I don't think we're in a position where it's immutable when we ship.
It's a different precedent than we've been setting. I agree it's the right precedent, but I don't think that's the precedent that Istio has historically followed. So I think we need to make that very clear then, that is the case, that it is subject to change, and that we're not going to be held to whatever the beta design is.
The clear, like, in user facing docs, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I think because it's also a bit subtle of, like, this is such a large thing. It's not like one feature like DNS or something. This is a new architecture. We'll probably not need one line that says Ambient is beta. We'll need kind of a document that says, here's beta, here's the implications, here's what's not beta, and go into detail there. I think that's something that's pretty reasonable and needed.
Sorry, just really quickly. I think, but also it seems like some of what exactly will be in beta is still up in the air. I think it would be good to have that written down someplace, like, just as it seems like there's not even agreement here necessarily what would be in it. Like, is it with the auth-z, is it with traffic redirection, that sort of stuff. I think it would be good to have that decided early and not like as we're getting ready to ship this thing. So there can be some discussion.
Yeah, to be clear, I think my hesitation with auth-z policies is one of the reasons why I'm fine with it being beta is because when I understand the functionality is there, it's more of a UX gap when it comes to putting what is supported or whether or not it having that feedback loop and status. That's really where more of my concern is on a UX perspective. But I think that from what I can tell, the actual underlying feature is there and not beta quality. So just wanted to call that out. The other thing that I wanted to say is that I think it would be a really good idea, not just for user communication, but also for project discipline, is if anytime, well, I won't make a policy yet, but I'll say for the Ambient blog post that we're planning on doing for like the release, have like a 3-sentence disclaimer talking about saying that this is a beta feature. Here's what that means for users. Keep this in mind when you choose to use it in production. Because I don't think it's very clear. It's clear on documentation. Sometimes I'll say it's clear on documentation whether it's beta or not. But what does that mean? What does it mean for API guarantees? What does it mean for stability? If we can get that nailed down in 3 or 4 sentences and put that not just in the very highly technical docs, but also in the announcement blog posts, I think that does a really good job of finding, reaching the people who are excited about Ambient and just making sure they have all the information in the spot where they're going to be getting the first-hand news about it hitting beta.
Yeah, I like that. Thanks so much, Keith, for your clarification of your stance on the auth-z policy and the suggestion of what beta means for Ambient. We'll certainly have you guys all review the contents as we prepare for the beta blog in the community.
One tiny suggestion is to try to find a different words than beta, because in Istio alpha, beta, and it's kind of meaningless now. I don't know, preview, pre-production, ready for use. I don't know how to put it, but if we can avoid the word beta, it will I don't know, help a lot of people maybe.
I agree to a point, Costin. I think that it's too confusing for users right now what alpha, beta, experimental, and stable all mean within Istio. I think that part of that's because our practice, we haven't practiced what we preach when it comes to our docs and that table that says what beta means and everything like that. But I do think that with some of this work that happened in that's shipping in 122 with the API, some APIs moving to V1. And things of that nature, I think we actually have an opportunity there to clarify, hey, now that we promoted these things to V1, let's kind of set the record straight on what all these different things mean. And now we have a chance to kind of refresh and actually start following those things.
It's not so easy to change people's mindset, and especially since we're just changing beta to V1, it's adding even more to confusion since we're talking about APIs in one part of the announcements and then implementation. We typically use stable or not stable. So almost stable. I don't know what we can use it, but we never used beta. I don't remember. I think we used stable, not V1 for implementation stability. And the API itself is V1. I mean, all the APIs used in Ambient are actually V1. Anyway, just a suggestion. I personally find it completely confusing, and I've been working on this project. If you think users will understand what beta means in this context, when the API is V1 and all the other things are floating around, then okay.
So, Keith, do you want to talk briefly on the channels work? I haven't been keep up closely, and how maybe that could help some with ambient.
Whitney's been driving most of that. Whitney, do you want to talk about the kind of decisions made with channels, and then I can talk about the implementation? Whitney may be at the AFK. Okay, so, no, you're
I
there.
can talk about it. Yeah, sorry, it took a while to find the mute button. But in regards to the release channels, what we pretty much have is a stable channel and an extended channel, where the stable channel will be the one that holds the APIs that are for sure stable, which is equivalent to our V1 and for now V1 beta 1 APIs. And the extended channel will hold everything that currently exists in Istio today, including the APIs that are permanently experimental, like was plugin and endpoint filter. So that is the general direction that we are going with the release channels. And I'm hoping we can potentially use those concept of stable versus extended Istio across the board with like ambient and implementation details. Do you want to go ahead, Keith?
Yeah. So and then on my end, as far as implementation for these channels, we after talking with TOC, we decided to roll with an iterative approach. And so I have a PR out right now. It's ready for review. That implements the validating admission policy, and as an experimental Helm value. And by experimental, I mean I created a like a stanza for a top level field for experimental, and then put, I think, stable validation or something like that. I didn't want to use the release channel phrase yet in case this experiment turned out not like we wanted it to and people wanted something else. So you didn't have to do any name recycling. But this is effectively the first implementation of release channels. And so the validating admission policy will block fields that are being used that are in Istio resources, Istio APIs that are extended, and or resources that are extended. And so right now this looks like WASM plugin as well as Omba filter are blocked, and then 3 fields in telemetry API are also blocked. This is, right now it's written by hand, but in the future, hope to write some automation to be able to read the protobuf, the Istio API protobufs, and the comments there, and generates the validating admission policy.
So, Kit, I have a question. In this world where stable means the V1 APIs and experimental use validation, how is Ambient treated? I mean, Ambient is beta, the API is V1, but the fields are also kind of V1, the target ref and other thing. Should it be only in Ambient enabled only in the experimental channel, or do we treat beta Ambient as stable from the channel perspective? Sorry, I'm completely confused about all the 20 different terms that we're using together. And also another question is, how about the annotations? Because we had some discussion in one of the PRs, I believe, and I'm not sure what is conclusion. So like what we discussed in previous meeting about the auto allocation of DNS, which we think it's pretty bad. Is it going to be validated in any way and allowed in stable? Or do we also consider it to be, not experimental and not usable in stable?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this is one of the reasons why we decided to why in talking with TLC, we decided on an iterative approach. I think that one of the other things that Istio's has done in features past has been to use annotations as APIs. And those annotations and the features those annotations surface have very little self-support as well. While we haven't, while the current policy in 1.22 does not take, does not handle annotations, I think that's a decent enhancement. I think even John created an issue to investigate doing some basic like type checking for annotations to make sure rules are rules, strings are strings, etc. That take the right form. I don't see any reason why we couldn't do that for to block service entry auto allocation as well. It really more depends on the degree to which TOC wants to be prescriptive, and the kind of the low-hanging fruit here is the resources that we have, the resources in the fields that exist on our APIs. Outside of that, we have other tools that we can use, like compatibility versions, things like that.
But is the intent that stable will only include things that are safe to use in productions, that we consider to be, ready, immutable, supported long term? And I mean, I know technically we cannot do everything, but do we agree that everything that is in stable should be stable?
From an API perspective, yes. And the underlying functionality of that API, like if as a user, your deployment and production is only as stable as the product of all of the things that you're using. So, for example, service entry is a stable API. But if you're using it, I don't think this works today, but if you're using it with Ambient, for example, Ambient is beta. So the maximum stability that you've got is beta. That's just kind of how stability works from my understanding.
So I guess my question is, if I'm running on a stable channel, can I use the ambient function given it's only beta?
Yes. And again, this is one of the reasons why, like in the admission policy implementation, I didn't use the word release channel, because we might decide in the future to make release channels bigger, to make it where not only at resource supply time are we going to do some checking, we're also going to enforce your channel at runtime. But we're not doing that right now. Right now, stable just means the things, the fields and the Kubernetes resources that we use are have appropriate tests and have API stability, meaning we're not going to change the name, remove the field, etc. That's kind
Okay,
of
so,
yeah. Go ahead.
so basically, you don't care about whether people using Sidecar or Ambient, you API version stability as part of the webhook.
Correct. And what that looks like practically is Whitney went and created a PR. I think it's still open, actually, for Envoy filter and WASM plugin to just have a comment annotation for being in the extended channel, and we can use that as the source of truth to author policy either manually or automated to block those fields from being used. The idea is that a mesh admin or a cluster admin can say, I only want my mesh users to my application developers to use fields that the Istio community says are stable. So I'm going to deploy this policy to block those things. That can be mesh admin, that can be a vendor, that can be anybody.
So, I think after we redefine the terms of alpha, beta, and what they mean, experimental and production, now we are messing up with what API means. Maybe we should have a clear explanation to users what API means for Istio, and that's somehow limited only to the P1 APIs in CRDs. I mean, API is only CRD, and because the way John is enabling Ambient now, it's going to be through an environment variable, which apparently, according to our definition of stable, includes all the environment variables that we have and all the annotations, including the ones that are not. And basically, if you want to use something unstable, you just put it in a notation and it's perfectly fine. But so it's mind-blowing confusing how we kind of twist all the words in that people use.
Let's not mix up internal implementation details with the user-facing surface. The users do not set an environment variable to enable Ambient. An environment variable happens to be used as a way to tell Istio to turn on some things, but that's not how the user interfaces with it. It's not like the other environment variables where there's no interface on top of it and it's just a pure arbitrary hack-in. Like there's a large set of things that need to change with Ambient across many different components. So
the Helm set values are no longer APIs, because it is an API in Helm. I mean, it's not.
Right, the interface to expose to users is say profile is Ambient.
Profile is not a Helm interface. I mean, profiles are just a convenience. From Helm perspective, you have a number of settings you define, not.
Sure, but we don't say that you can set those and that's stable. We say profile, Ambient is how you use Istio Ambient Beta.
Is profile a feature of Helm?
It is in our Helm charts.
It is. I actually just use it today. So you can actually build conditions out of it too.
So it's Helm minus profile Ambient. It's
Yeah, so it does happen to set some environment variables, yes, but no user should be setting those manually. Right?
Okay, then Ambient is fine. Then at least this one is fine. But my question remains. I mean, we have a lot of annotation and environment variables that are now treated as stable.
So at Costin, I think what I'm getting from you is that we have environment variables, we have implementation details that we treat as immutable because users depend on them. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that the meaning of word stable is now as muddy as the meaning of word alpha or beta. It's the one we discussed earlier, DNS auto allocation, for example. It's perfectly fine. I mean, there is no restriction on using it in stable. Ambient, which we declare as beta, will be perfectly fine to use in the stable channel. It's again, as someone outside of our kind of world where each word means a different thing every month, a normal user would expect stable to have a certain semantic. I mean, it's what you can use in production to be guaranteed to be stable. I mean, it's a normal English definition of word stable. I don't know. I hope users will understand it, because I'm completely lost in kind of Humpty Dumpty word definition modes that we're using.
I mean, ultimately, it depends on. I think it boils down to the context and what it is you're saying is stable. I think stable API is different from has tests. Is different from. Well, let me back up. Not going to remove an API is different from has tests and is ready for production. Is different from. It depends on the thing that the word stable has implications depending on the context it's being used.
It does seem confusing, though, that if ambient is in the stable one, and what we're saying that it is subject to change.
Well,
So
when you say it's in the stable one, and that's not even like a consideration, right? Ambient is not in a channel because it's not a CRD. Like channels are kind of at this point a CRD specific construct.
Okay. So like the annotations that are being used will not be part of that? Like use waypoint?
So annotations have to have a different versioning mechanism because they're not a versioned API.
Right.
None of the annotations that we have are versioned. So annotations are either stable or experimental, right? If we were going to choose our API versioning parlance.
So which are the ones that would be like, what would use
and then they're obviously stable or experimental in different contexts, right? Like the use waypoint annotation is meaningless if you don't install the ambient profile.
Louis, I think you're more confused than I am, because you are saying that annotations are either stable or experimental, and according to the current definition, annotations are stable because they will be in the stable channel, unless.
No. So they don't have a delivery mechanism like channel, right? So the only way to cover the stability of an annotation right now is to document it, right? We have no tooling, right? We don't have admission control. Yeah.
Or yeah, I mean, not yet, but that's exactly what I was saying. I mean, eventually the expectation, but my expectation was that an annotation that is not stable according to the doc or whatever criteria we have, or an environment variable that is not marked as stable, should be eventually, I mean, when we have the means, whatever, excluded from the stable channel. So if I choose a stable channel, I expect to get stuff that, like, if a customer is using it today, it will keep working and it's guaranteed to be stable. Not in the sense of it's a CRD only that has a field that is marked as stable.
It's an API whose semantics will not change.
Yes, but if I use an annotation that is currently not unstable, it may change and break me. So eventually we should have, and documentation wise and everything else, stable should mean stable, and experimental should be an experimental, not.
Right, but it's document only, right? Like that's all we can do right now.
For now, yes, but if we could implement, I mean, some, in the injection or something to remove.
Yes.
I thought, but as Keith's implementing it as a validating webhook, wouldn't it be enforced then?
The VAP stuff has limitations, Justin.
Yeah, Cell has complexity ceiling.
Right.
And so I'm cautious against using it for all the things.
Yes, yeah. I don't know if we can certainly check with Istio couple. Right, that's the compensating tool, right? For want of a better term. But right now we have a complexity problem to do it, because like there are lots of non-Istio resources that can be annotated with Istio annotations.
Not everything needs to be done through the cell or whatever validator we have.
Sure, yeah. Again, but it's more complexity custom, right? Like we haven't done all of
it. Can we add some new environment variable in Istio to indicate that it's operating in a stable channel and then maybe people can contribute, if stable, ignore. Is it acceptable according to the definition?
So I'll jump in as someone. I've been trying to work on some version of Safe Istio for about a year, and that's the one approach that I've tried to not go down, because of what it would do to the code base. Like the things that I personally have been trying to avoid is any implementation that would have to cause the control plane to live in a split world, where it's doing two very different things depending on what is set on at install time, because that just feels rife with camera check time of use bugs. And so whether it's the CRD approach or the validating admission policy that we're doing now or something else, they're all kind of trying to avoid making pilots have to make decisions at runtime.
Though, Keith, in theory, we could do a scrub on read style implementation, right, which wouldn't affect the branching logic too much.
That's effectively what the CRD approach for release channels was, where
yeah,
you
but
prune.
but for annotations, right?
Yes, for annotations that we could do something like that. Though again, I would echo what John's mentioned about CRD approach, where it's better to start with those sorts of things on top of the stack rather than in the control plane, especially in my opinion.
Yeah, the scrub on read is just a kind of convenient way to do what we couldn't do with a webhook, really easily.
So it's better for users to have a lot of experimental and safe shoot yourself in the foot features enabled, because we do not want to add some if statements in Istio-D, and then we'll have to deal with those features becoming kind of grandfathered, because if we find in stable channel people are using those things, what can we do? They become V1 automatically. Seems, we can revert the PR if we find a better solution, but it's better if that's the only solution we know and we don't have any other plan or viable plan for fixing this problem without the ifs in Istio-D. Maybe we should be pragmatic about it.
I think that where we are today is an improvement over, or rather, where we're going to be in 122 is an improvement over where we are right now. And we can continue to iterate on it and see what approaches work and what doesn't work based on user feedback. I think that's going to be as good as we're going to get coming up with a new solution from whole cloth.
Yeah. So the way I'm looking at this, Keith, correct me if I'm wrong. So as a user, I'm thinking I'm relying on this for the customer resource check, right? So you can provide me clear guidance on whether my Istio resources meets the channel requirements. And then if I'm using labels or annotation, I would have to look up docs. And if I'm
and Istio couple, right?
But
okay, potential Istio cuddle. And if I want to find out future stability, not just the API, I also need to look at our future status page, right? So that's how you find out, and the docs, how you find out, okay, Ambient, we're using its API, OSC, for example. I'm sure it's going to be in stable channel, but the functionality of the implementation is beta. However, because the API doesn't change, right, that gives me good confidence with this, which is the value of these channels, right?
Correct. So, and just to make sure I'm clear, like in the future, we could create maybe a separate validating admission policy for annotations and labels. It's going to be a giant policy, but that's something we could explore, but again, we hit complexity limits, things like that. Like, I think that these all build on top of each other, but in general, what you're saying, yes.
But I guess there was, we kind of went down a implementation hole, but like, I'm still a little unclear. What does it mean? Like, if we're saying that these annotations for like redirection are not stable because, or that we may change them, they're essentially beta. It doesn't seem like they belong in the stable channel, but they're required to even get to the point where you would use an ambient authorization policy, which is stable.
I don't think that's what John was saying earlier, Justin. I think he was saying, like, we may choose to deprecate them. That doesn't make them unstable.
Okay, but we're calling ambient a beta release.
Yeah, so like use waypoint and waypoint 4 have to be stable APIs. There's no way to version them. Right, the semantics cannot change. They can be replaced.
So
right, which is the logical version of versioning is replacement for annotations, right?
Louis, so the interception, excluding port from interception, it is stable, but in ambient doesn't work because it's not implemented.
Yeah, so like there's this bimodality, right, because of ambient mode versus non-ambient mode, right, where there's a bunch of things that work in sidecars that make no sense whatsoever. Right, and we'll have to document that. I do agree it would be quite useful to record in mesh config or some central stable place what the channel was and what the mode was. That would at least facilitate istio-cuttle, giving users good guidance if it was run as a runtime check. And then later, if we add more validation, then it can rely on that information too. John, do you disagree with anything I just said?
No, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, so use waypoint right now is a stable API. There's no, right, it cannot function. Just like every other annotation, unless it's explicitly marked experimental in the docs, which this would not be. But that doesn't mean that the feature ossifies. And this is just the nature of the beast with annotations, right? We don't all own all the APIs that we are extending. Costin, I'm going to ignore the environment variables part for the moment because they're really not supposed to be. I know they are APIs. They're not supposed to be, but they are.
The discussion started in a previous meeting with the environment DNS auto allocate.
Yeah, I'm aware there's some gaps there, but for practical purposes, we want to get away from that position.
By marking them stable.
Effectively, yes. Right, but now the annotations will have to, like, there's going to be a document which says this annotation, ambient yes, sidecars no. This annotation, ambient no, sidecars yes. Stable or experimental, right? There's going to be that grid. There's no choice.
I guess if someone can just find all the annotation environment variables that we use and figure out if they work or don't work, it will be a good progress.
Well, we certainly found all of them. But yes, that's going to be the challenge. The suggestion, I think, from the documentation standpoint, because we're going to have a kind of site with insight for ambient, is to just document the list of annotations that are supported for ambient and then say no other annotations are supported. At least that's a usable documentation experience for those users. And that's definitely, that has to be part of the docs. I think that's pretty well understood.
Do you want to have the list split into with those annotation we support and we mean it? I mean, it's something that we want long term, and this list of annotation just accidentally.
We'll have to do the stable experimental thing there, Custom.
Yeah, I mean, even as part of the exercise you described about listing the annotations and environment variables that work with ambient, do we want to also sort them into things that are considered stable versus experimental?
Yes, yeah, we have to. I think the goal is to document as few annotations as possible as being supported for ambient. So I would hope that the overwhelming majority of them are stable.
I feel like KubeCon talk percolating.
Yeah,
And they start SEO day talk, just walking users through. I mean, the thing I will agree with Costin with is that we do have that the nature of this beast is very multimodal, and so users have, especially advanced SEO users who are trying to move over to ambient. We need to help them understand what is going to be usable and how we think about this. So, docs, videos, anything we can do to illuminate the position, I think would be very helpful.
so I'm certainly imagining a doc which says, look, this is what's supported for ambient, and only this. Here's a pointer to the other doc where we list all the annotations, and we say, look, there's lots of other annotations that are used in sidecar mode, but those are not supported, only these ones. But just like we're going to have guidance talk about the use of the gateway API for these versus which of the Istio APIs you should be using, and not the other Istio APIs, right? Like, don't use the sidecar resource, even though it's stable, right? The sidecar resource is completely irrelevant in that bit.
Yep.
So with regard to recording the user intent around channel and mode at runtime, do we actually record this information right now, or do we actually need to do some work for that? Because that does seem like something that should be done pre-beta, because that's going to want to be stable.
Sorry, Louis, I was trying to take notes. Are you asking what APIs we record for
When the user
ambient?
performs install mode equals ambient, we should write that somewhere that is immutable and stable, so that any tooling that wants to know how the system is going to behave has one place to look.
It's tough. I mean, it's an install thing, so Helm writes the installed state, but there's a lot of different methods that don't. I mean, they could look at ztunnel exists, or they could look at the environment variable set in HDOD, but I don't know if those are stable APIs per se. There's no like status of the install API in Istio that we have today.
It is using code, so HDOD is already using code, if feature enabled.
Oh yeah, I mean the HDOD certainly knows it. And like internally, it's very clear. It's just I think you were saying for like tooling, right?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, where's the best place to put this information for tooling? Is it call HDOD at runtime? That doesn't seem great. Is it like write it into mesh config, and HDOD checks it, and if it's wrong, then it writes it. Like that would work.
I wouldn't make mesh config writable, so it would probably be something else.
And we could put mesh config status.
Please, no.
Yeah, I know.
What
terrible.
tooling do you
I
have
feel-
in mind specifically? I guess that would probably help.
So any vendor tooling that's not tooling that we ship.
Yeah.
Like, how would Istio Cuttle check it? Just as a thought experiment.
I don't know. Look for ztunnel probably. If I was to go.
Right.
I know it's not good, but that's
Yeah. Like that's We need something that's. What's that, Custom?
So I think you're into something, Louis. I mean, I think, is there any reason we cannot have mesh config ambient.enable and HDOD using that thing instead of the environment variable? Because after all, that will allow tools to figure out. I mean, they read mesh config and they know if mesh is enabled or not. They don't have to look at Z-tunnel since Z-tunnel may not be.
Yeah, I think we're all agreeing that we need something better, and that's definitely a flavor of better. It's just what's achievable, right?
Yeah, actually, the issue with mesh config is the same as the issue with reading the environment variable, in that it's not actually guaranteed to be there, right? Like for external EastOD, for example, could very well not be in the cluster, and it actually emerges with the file system, and it's dynamic, and making the ambient stuff dynamic in the control plane might be possible, but it would at least need work.
We need a mesh resource. Like this screams.
Oh, actually, Keith, gateway class. That's, yeah, Gostin said it too. Gateway class. We only write the Easter waypoint gateway class if ambient's enabled, and we could do a less hacky way and like maybe write some status there. It's not bad. I mean, it's kind of hacky, I guess, to use gateway class, and you may not even have the CRDs enabled. Like in the API, gateway API group, we had talked about adding a mesh class, and then that would be the spot we would write everything.
Yeah, like if the user wasn't using a waypoint, they would never install Gateway API CRDs, so you couldn't necessarily. Well, if they don't have Gateway API CRDs, then mesh wouldn't be there anyway.
Right, but you don't have to have waypoints to use ambient, right? You could be Z-tunnel only.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, all kidding aside, I really do. I think I pushed back a little bit on the idea that this needs to be surfaced in a single way. Like, I agree it's useful for tooling, but really ambient is really modeled through distinct capabilities, which is what makes it difficult to just say, oh, ambient's enabled. Like you're going for like the lowest common denominator, which is why what John said with the check if Z-tunnel exists isn't super great from a tooling perspective, but it actually is probably the most consistent way of checking whether it's enabled.
I have to disagree because we said that we allow alternative implementations that CNI vendors or whatever can build the equivalent functionality. So checking for Z-tunnel is probably the worst thing we can do.
That's probably fair. Yeah, I guess if you're looking to if this control plane, yeah, it's fair. If this DoD is using ambient, that is a different thing. That's fair.
Can I ask a naive question? What behavioral differences occur because you've installed ambient mode? Like you've enabled those annotations that are not used in sidecar mode, etc. But if I install ambient mode and don't make any changes to my API or to my configuration within Istio, nothing changes, right?
Oh, it does. Oh, it does.
Well,
not really.
So,
I don't think.
Could you elaborate, Costin?
We enable the new H1 port that breaks network policy.
But if you don't use it, is it breaking network policy?
Oh yeah, it does, because you have a port that allow an attacker to bypass network policy if they know how to do it. Even if you don't use it, the attacker will use it. So
You have to restart things too, right, to pick it up.
Well, that's the nature of installing, isn't it?
Well, I was
Mhm.
referring to like that you would have to restart the gateway or the pods, right? It's not like automatically.
well, not immediately, but the attacker will eventually be able to explain. And that's just an example, because we have all kinds of changes in behavior. That's just what we were discussing in one of the PRs recently.
I mean, that sounds like a pretty deeply buried thing. It doesn't sound unimportant, Costin, but I'm wondering how much we could fit to the abstraction. Ambient is an API. You can turn off the utilization of it so that if you write to those APIs, nothing happens. Or you can turn on the utilization of it, but fundamentally nothing changes just by turning it on. You actually have to use it. I wonder how close we are to being able to make that true.
well, I think custom, maybe another way of saying what Mitch is saying is security is important, but it's somewhat orthogonal to intent, right? Security is either delivered or not delivered. Its lack is a bug. It's not a feature. But the thing I would say is we will at some point end up in a world where users are doing upgrades from sidecars to ambient, and they'll have both modes running in a cluster at the same time.
Yep.
And so we can't say that ambient and sidecars are mutually exclusive.
No,
So we
no,
don't
not at
just
all. But
Yeah.
that would be an API thing, right? You'd look at one namespace, it's labeled for sidecar injection. Another namespace is labeled for Z-tunnel utilization.
right. I think what we're saying is that's the only way to actually check, is to check in context by context.
Yeah.
But it's not that simple, Mitch, because if you want interoperability and which I agree, I mean, you want to have sidecars and Z-tunnel to interoperate. Once you have a namespace with ambient and one space with sidecar, you have to enable something to, the waypoint, the waypoint support in sidecar and a lot of other things, which again suddenly changes the behavior of sidecar.
Right now, we have not said that sidecar interop with ambient is stable, so we don't actually know that that's how it's going to work yet.
Oh, please don't use a stable word again.
No, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like we do not support that use case right now.
I don't know, but eventually we want to. Just said we want to allow people to
Oh
migrate.
yeah, I'm just not sure that it's going to work the way you described it, Austin.
Sure, but whatever is going to work, some code, some behavior will need to change somehow.
I mean, that seems like something that we could change in sidecar mode over the coming releases, move to the point where compatibility with ambient is the default.
Yes, like one of the options is that sidecars stop doing TLS completely and are entirely dependent on Z-tunnel to do that. And they layer.
But
And then, yes,
Okay.
and it would alleviate the particular security concern that Costin is talking about, or at least move responsibility for it into a centralized place. It's probably also the easiest way to do it, but we haven't decided yet.
Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying. I appreciate it.
Okay, we seem to have. We know what we're doing for 122, right? Which is documentation for annotations. Keith will have the experimental support for channels for the CRDs, but not for annotations. We can look at making some incremental improvements, but they won't happen in 122. But that is where we are.
Yeah, sounds right. So what we were discussing early on about how do we check if it's ambient, that's post 122, right?
Well, I think what we're saying now is the use of the annotations in context is how you check, and not anything else.
Oh, okay, I missed that. Okay.
Because that at least is stable and is an API-ish.
Yep, sounds good. All right, we are very over. Should we wrap this up? Louis, I just want to mention this quickly. Justin raised this point, so I can owe you if you want to maybe just appeal over to TOC member for official approval, see if they have any objections.
Yeah, I mean, we could do this offline or online. When is the next TOC meeting?
Yeah, probably need to do it before or offline if needed.
I wasn't here for that part. Is this something that's blocking 122?
So the context of this is we are thinking we need to do an evaluation of this API proposed in this doc to see if we can claim it as part of beta for the layer 7 for waypoint as part of 122. So Keith and Justin waiting. I think Keith I think you had some concern on RC policy status, but you're fine with beta. Justin just wanted to have all the TOC approved, not only direction approval, but take a deeper look at the API and make sure it's the TOC comfortable with it.
Okay.
Or if there's
I'm
any
gonna spend a little bit of
objections.
time on that. I'm unemployed at the moment, and I'm trying to resist doing too much work and actually enjoy my unemployment. But I do think I'll spend some time on that this week.
Thank
Yeah,
you
Mitch,
so much.
we can get together. Just on that point, would it be useful just to have kind of a section in the docs describing what's going to be in the release and what's not?
Oh, that would be super useful. Yes.
Like, yeah, like we can either do that in Slack or in the docs.
I would definitely agree with that. I also just say that I just had some concerns that these things were directionally approved, and it seemed very quick to then say that we are going to support Waypoint for beta when not everything has been signed off. So it was more of a process concern than necessarily a disagreement with any of the technical decisions.
When you say waypoint for beta, Justin, you're talking about 123, right?
No, they're talking about 122 enabling it.
Oh, I mean, okay. That really feels like that ought to be a TOC discussion since we decided not to last time we met.
That was part of my concern. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I missed that portion of the meeting. That's my fault.
It was in the TOC Slack channel, Mitch.
Okay, I'll read up.
A weekish ago. Sorry. Yeah, feel free to ask questions there.
Okay, thank you.
My for what it's worth, I think in the last TOC meeting last month or last week, my recollection was that we were going to do a go no go a week before. No, it's like 2 weeks before the release or 3 weeks before the release.
Yep.
Comms and stuff ready. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember it being final either direction. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think of the things that are currently directionally approved, policy status is the one that is probably not going to be there for beta, just whole cloth, right? Everything else would be there plus or minus some sub feature. So I guess there's one interesting question. Do we consider status? We've never dealt with versioning status yet in releases. Obviously, it's implementing status would be a pretty major block of code, and so itself could implement runtime instability. So I'm hesitant to say that we should do like ship status in a point release. I would not think we would do that. So I think policy status will be in 123. And there are some other status pieces that are likely not going to be in beta, for instance, status on service. I don't think that blocks is going to beta.
Yeah, that's kind of my fundamental point with status is that it's a really great thing to have and puts polish on it, but I think that the beta can exist without it. It's a severability, in other words.
Because right now there's nothing to consume status. Right?
Except the user, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, except the users. So documentation currently feels like it. And Istio Cuddle could do that.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for bringing me up to speed. Again, I apologize for missing the first half of the conversation there.
It's okay. You just happen to miss an exciting week, Mitch.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining.
Bye,
Bye.
folks.